Hey, I'm Bob at ILikeToMakeStuff. Today I'm going to show you how to cut a hole in your workbench and make a downdraft table. I wanted my box to fit within the existing bracing of my table so I wouldn't have to mess with the frame underneath the tabletop. So I decided to make it 18 inches square. I started with some scrap MDF that I had and set up a stop block, cut 4 pieces down to 18 inches long. I ripped one of the pieces down to 4.5 inches and then the other piece down to 2 inches. These are going to be the front and the back pieces. The two sides are going to have an angle cut to them. I'll show you that here in just a second. On the two side pieces, I marked 4.5 inches on one end and then 2 inches on the other end. This way I had a reference point so I could draw a straight line to get the angle I needed. Then I used this really cheap taper jig to find out what that angle was. I could take that jig to the table saw and then use it to push the wood through at the angle. This thing's really inexpensive from Harbor Freight, but it's really handy. Setting all the pieces in place, I saw that the back panel needed a slight angle cut to it, and I did that on the table saw. I wasn't very specific with the angle, but it was enough just to get it out of the way. Then I glued the whole thing together and just used some brad nails to hold it in place. I forgot to film one thing here. I ended up cutting 1 inch off the front and the back pieces. This is 1/2 inch material and I wanted the whole thing to be a square, and since everything was cut at 18 inches, I needed to trim down the front and back panels so that once it was all together, it was 18 inches square. For the bottom of the box, I used some 1/8 inch plywood and cut it down to 18 inches square. You could use MDF or thicker plywood for this, but I chose this because I had it laying around and it's really lightweight. I glued it on and attached it with some brad nails. I'm going to be attaching this to my existing Dust Collection Systerm, so I used one of my blast gates to trace the hole to make sure that the blast gate would sit in the right position. Just draw a circle that matches the size of hose that you'll be using. Before I drilled this hole, I clamped on an extra piece of wood behind it. MDF has a bad habit of blowing out when you try to drill a large hole through it. By clamping this piece on, I got absolutely zero blowout. And yes, it would have made more sense to do this on the drill press before I assembled it. The frame of my workbench is just 2x4 construction, so it was pretty easy to figure out where I needed to cut the hole. I wanted to use the existing 2x4s on two sides to attach the box. Now here I'm making a plunge cut with a circular saw. You get the blade up to speed and then brace the back of it and slowly push it down into the wood. If this is not something you're comfortable with, don't do it. You could accomplish about the same thing by drilling a hole in each corner and then connecting the holes with a jigsaw. This is one of those things that can be done safely, but if you're not totally comfortable with it, you definitely should not do it. I didn't make the cuts go all the way to the corner. I left just enough material in there to hold the piece of wood in place. After I had the long cuts done, I could use a jigsaw to just trim out the corners. Then I set my box in place and used some clamps to hold it against the frame of the table. Just use some long screws to run it into the 2x4 and secure it on two sides. There was a bit of a gap on the third side that was supposed to match up with the center bracing, so I just put a shim in there and screwed through the shim into the existing 2x4 and it worked fine. You want this to be as airtight as possible, and although it can't be completely airtight, some caulk around all the joints definitely helps. I used a Forstner bit to drill a hole about the size of your finger in the corner of the piece that I cut out. This would help me get it in and out easily. I cut down some old pegboard to 18 inches square to match the size of the hole. Then I set it down in the opening and measured the difference in height that I had to make up. It ended up being 5/16. I used some scrap pine and cut down 4 strips 5/16 thick. Then I just glued them onto the underside of the pegboard all the way around. Now, I didn't measure these ahead of time because they were just scrap and they ended up being a little bit short. I clamped them down so they could dry, and then when I came back, I filled the little gap between each piece with some caulk. Once it was dry, I drilled the same hole as the other piece and dropped it in place. Then just plug in a shop vac or your dust collection and you're all done. Here's some examples to show you how well it works. This is an example with 80 grit paper, no suction. Here's the same piece of wood, 80 grit paper, with the suction turned on. You have virtually no sawdust left on the table. If you didn't want to cut a hole in your workbench, you could always just make this as a box. It would be almost identical to what I made in my vacuum forming video. So if you made a box, you could use it for dual purposes, both downdraft and vacuum forming. Be sure to check out that video to find out more about it. I went this route because I didn't want to have another thing to have to store in my shop. This way it's built in, it's out of the way. There's a couple things about this. It works best with really fine dust, so it works better for sanding rather than cutting. And the larger the area, the less suction you're gonna have. So if you don't have enough suction, you can mask off an area of it, which is gonna pull more air through fewer holes, and you get better suction. Now, having this cutout in your bench could be beneficial in other ways. If you wanted to make a mess but not really do it on the top surface, you could suspend something across to do finishing or painting, and any drips or any mess that you make is just gonna fall down in here. Then you can cover it back up. If you like this project, let me know in the comments below or at ILikeToMakeStuff.com. And I'd love to see some stuff you're working on, so find me on your social network of choice and send me some pictures. Let me know what you're up to. If you're new to the channel, I'd love to have you subscribe, and I have a lot more project videos right there for you to check out. I've also got a playlist of Brain Pick. That's a live Q&A show that I do every 3 weeks or so, and it's a chance for you to ask questions to your favorite content creators and makers on YouTube. And don't forget to check out my podcast with Jimmy DiResta and David Picciuto called Making It. We just talk about making stuff with your hands. I make these videos because I love to do it. I love to teach, and I love the interaction. And if you would like to help me do more of this, there's a lot of ways you can support what I'm doing right down here. Thanks for watching, guys. See you next time.